Tafl games are a family of ancient Germanic and Celtic strategy board games played on a checkered or latticed gameboard with two armies of uneven numbers, representing variants of an early Scandinavian board game called Tafl and hnefatafl in contemporary literature. Although the size of the board and the number of pieces varied, all games involved a distinctive 2-to-1 ratio of pieces, with the lesser side having a king piece that started in the center. No complete, unambiguous description of the rules of a Tafl game exists, but the king's objective was to escape to the board's periphery or corners, while the greater force's objective was to capture him. The attacking force has the natural advantage at the start of each game, likely indicating an important cultural aspect by mimicking the success of Viking raids. Another cultural indication of the king is the importance of the Viking chief's presence in battle. Although the kings of Europe later claimed divine rule and sat upon the throne rather than bodies in the battlefield, it was essential for a Viking chief to be considered an equal in war. The importance of war is also reflected in hnefatafl because it is a war strategy game, which can indicate an important reason why the gaming boards have been found with males of all ages. In Balnakil, a male skeleton between the ages of 8 and 13 was found with weapons in a hnefatafl board game. Vikings tended to take boys onto the battlefield with them, which explains why young boys also played these war strategic board games. There is also some controversy over whether some Tafl games may have employed dice. Tafl spread everywhere the Vikings traveled, including Iceland, Britain, Ireland, and Lapland. Versions of Tafl, comprising hnefatafl, Alir Evangelii, Torb, Brandub, Ardri, and Tablut, were played across much of northern Europe from earlier than 400 BC until it was supplanted by chess in the 12th century. The term Tafl is the original name of the game. However, hnefatafl became the preferred term for the game in Scandinavia by the end of the Viking Age, to distinguish it from other board games, such as skagtafl, hnefatafl and hnefatafl, as these became known. The specific name hnefatafl possibly arose as meaning board game of the fist from hnefi plus tafl, where fist referred to the central king piece. The precise etymology is disputed, but hnefi certainly referred to the king piece, and several sources refer to hnefatafl as king's table. In Anglo-Saxon England, the term Tafl also referred to many board games. It is not known if the Anglo-Saxons had a specific name for the game, or if they generically referred to it as Tafl in the way that modern people might refer to cards. Several games may be confused with Tafl games due to the inclusion of the word Tafl in the names or other similarities. Hnefatafl is the Old Norse name for fox and geese, a game dating from at least the 14th century. It is still known and played in Europe. Hnefatafl is the Old Norse name for tables. Skagtafl is the Old Norse name for chess. Fithchel was played in Ireland. The Welsh equivalent was Gwydbwl and the Breton equivalent Gwesbwl. All terms mean wood sense. This popular medieval game was played with equal forces on each side and thus was not a Tafl variant, but rather may have been the medieval descendant of the Roman game Latrunculi or Ludus Latrunculorum. Tafl variants. Brandub was the Irish form of Tafl. We know from two poems that it was played with 5 men against 8, and that one of the 5 was a Brannan, or chief. A number of 7x7 boards have been found, the most famous being the elaborate wooden board found at Ballinderry in 1932, featuring holes for pegged pieces, possibly to allow for portability of the game. The name Brandub means black raven. Ardry. Ardry was a Scottish Tafl variant played on a 7x7 board with a king and 8 defenders against 16 attackers. This is the least documented of the known Tafl variants. Tablet. This variant from Sápmi is the best documented version. Carl Linnaeus recorded the rules and a drawing of the board in his journal during his 1732 expedition to Lapland. His description in Latin was incomplete, as he did not speak the Sámi language of his hosts and described the game only from observing the players. The game was played on a 9x9 mat of embroidered reindeer hide. In his diary, Lachesis Laponica, Linnaeus referred to the light pieces as Swedes and the dark pieces as Muscovites. What may have been the same game was still being played in the late 19th century, as described in P.A. Lindholm's Hos Lapbonda. Talb. This variant was played in Wales. It is described as being played with 8 pieces on the king's side and 16 on the attacker's side. Robert Apifan documented it with a drawing in a manuscript dated 1587. His version was played on an 11x11 board with 12 pieces on the king's side, and 24 pieces on the opponent's side. His passage states, the above Talb should be played with a king in the center and 12 men in the places next to him, and 24 men seek to capture him. These are placed 6 in the center of each side of the board and in the 6 central positions, and 2 move the men in the game, and if one belonging to the king comes between the attackers, he is dead and is thrown out of the game, and the same if one of the attackers comes between 2 of the king's men in the same manner, and if the king himself comes between 2 of the attackers, and if you say, watch your king, before he moves to that space, and he is unable to escape, you capture him. If the other says, I am your liegeman, and goes between 2, there is no harm. If the king can go along the line, that side wins the game. Hnefatafl was a popular game in medieval Scandinavia and was mentioned in several of the Norse sagas. Some of these saga references have contributed to controversy over the possible use of dice in playing hnefatafl. The rules of the game were never explicitly recorded, and only playing pieces and fragmentary boards are extant, so it is not known for sure how the game was played. If dice were in fact used, nothing has been recorded about how they were employed. Archaeological and literary sources indicate hnefatafl may have been played on a 13x13 or an 11x11 board. It became a popular game in Northern Europe during the Viking era, a turbulent time full of conflicts. When chess became a popular game during the Middle Ages, the rules of hnefatafl were forgotten over time. Hnefatafl was particularly popular in Nordic countries and followed the Viking civilization to other parts of Europe, primarily to the British Isles and the Viking country of Germanic. The game developed differently at different locations. Archaeologists have found additions in places such as Ireland and Ukraine. Hnefatafl literally translates to fist table, from the Old Icelandic hnef fist and tafl table. The study of medieval manuscripts and examination of pieces and boards has allowed researchers to figure out how the game was probably played. It was last recorded to have been played in Wales during 1587 and Lapland in 1723. Alia Evangelii, which means Game of the Gospels, was described with a drawing in the 12th century Corpus Christi College, Oxford manuscript 122. From Anglo-Saxon England. It was played on the intersections of a board of 18x18 cells. The manuscript describes the layout of the board as a religious allegory, but it is clear that this was a game based on hnefatafl. Reconstruction. No complete, unambiguous description of the rules of a Tafl game exists. The best description we have from history is that given by Linnaeus of the game tablet in the 1732 diary of his travels, Lacus's Laponica. The following rules are based on the 1811 translation of Lacus's Laponica into English by James Edward Smith. The game is played on a 9x9 board. Initial setup is as shown in the diagram. The king starts on the central square, a castle, called the Knackis, which no other piece may ever occupy. The 8 defenders, called Swedes, start on the 8 squares adjoining the Knackis, in the form of a cross. The 16 attackers, called Muscovites, start in groups of 4 at the center of each edge of the board. All remaining squares may be occupied by any piece during the game. Any piece may move any number of vacant spaces in any straight line, but not diagonally. No piece may ever pass over another piece in its path. If the king should ever have an unimpeded path to the edge of the board, unless he is immediately blocked by a Muscovite, he may escape and the game is over. If the king should ever have a path of escape, he must call out Rachi. If 2 paths of escape, then his escape is imminent and he must call out Tuichu. Any piece, save for the king, may be captured and removed from the board if it becomes surrounded on 2 opposite sides by enemies. If the king is surrounded on all 4 sides by enemies, he is taken prisoner. If he is surrounded on 3 sides, he may escape by the 4th. If the king is on a square adjoining the Knackis and is surrounded on 3 sides by his enemies and the 4th by the Knackis, he is captured. If the king is captured, the Swedes are conquered and the Muscovites are victorious. Several problems of gameplay are left woefully ambiguous or completely untouched in Linnaeus' notes, and some translations are problematic. There are also several other variations played by modern reconstructionists. Balance of play. There is some controversy concerning the widely reported imbalance of the game, as the rules strongly favor the king, although there are several rule modifications that can produce more balanced play, such as a weaponless king, escape to the corners, or hostile attacker camps. Schmidberger even reveals some workarounds to produce more balanced play without modifying the rules of gameplay. One such solution is by bidding. Players take turns bidding on how many moves it will take them to win the game. The lowest bidder gets the king. Thus, one player may open with a bid of 15 turns, the other player may counter with a bid of 14 turns, and the first player, more confident in his ability to escape in 13 rounds than in his ability to contain for 14, may bid 13 and take the king's side. If that player does not escape within 13 turns, the other player wins. Another workaround is to play a 2-round match, in which players switch sides after the first round. If the king escapes both rounds, the winner is the player whose king escaped in the fewest turns. The description of Talbot by Robert Apifan states that the king could be captured by 2 men. Peterson suggests that Linnaeus' special capture of the king is incorrect, and states that statistics from modern games played with 4-man capture of the king show that white wins more often than black. However, it has not yet been demonstrated that balanced play results from rules allowing for a 2-man capture of the king. Interestingly, some sources indicate that Scandinavian museum reconstructions of hnefatafl typically stipulate that the king may be captured by only 2 attackers, unless he is still in his hall, in which case he must be surrounded on all 4 sides. Legacy. Around 1960, Milton Bradley published Swords and Shields, which was essentially tablet as recorded by Linnaeus, but with the Swedes transformed into shields and the Muscovites transformed into swords. Tafl seems also to have been the basis for two other modern board games that each bear significant resemblance to the historical games, but with some important differences. Both games feature similar symmetry but diverge from the classic 2-to-1 attacker-defender ratio, and both have important differences in the tactics. Breakthrough was developed in the 1960s as part of the 3M bookshelf game series. It features Tafl-like symmetry, but with 12 defenders plus 1 flagship, pitted against 20 attackers upon a tiered board, so that the objective of the defenders is to escort the flagship from the center to the outer zone of the board. Apart from the distinction of the inner zone and outer zone, there are no distinctive spaces on the breakthrough board. Breakthrough also features a distinctive double move, whereas no evidence points to such a move in any of the historical games. *The, a modern game inspired by a series of fantasy novels by Terry Pratchett, also features the general symmetry of Tafl games, although it is played on an octagonal board with only 8 defenders pitted against 32 attackers. *The also features a thudstone, but no king piece. There are also important differences in the moves and attacks in *The. In 2008, hnefatafl was revived by Peter Kelly in the island of Tafl in Shetland, where the annual World Quick Play hnefatafl Championships are now held each summer under the auspices of the hnefatafl panel. The 2008 champion was Wendy Sutherland from Yorkshire, while the 2009 and 2010 championships were won by Tim Miller from Somerset. The term quick play refers to the time limit of 10 seconds per move, marked by the sounding of a gong. hnefatafl can be played online on sites similar to chess.com. Aage Nielsen created his site in 1998 and currently hosts the World Tafl Federation hnefatafl Championship Tournament. A modern hnefatafl game site was launched in 2014 by Jacob Teal and John Carlyle.